We're on. So they found grains of wheat in Egyptian tombs. So these grains of wheat are over 3,000 years old. It's miraculous, that such a tiny thing as a seed seems to be perfectly preserved. And there was a myth of what they call mummy wheat that has been found with mummies, that if you planted one of these seeds, then you would get some wheat growing, and you could see exactly the kind of wheat that the Pharaoh would have had growing in his fields. But it is a myth. They tried those seeds, never germinated, because although they looked okay, they had deteriorated too much. And as I thought about it, it's kind of rather sad that if you think that if you took one grain that had been found, you had planted it, then fruitful grains, 100 grains that year. And if you'd planted those 100 grains, then each would have produced another 100. And how much grain could have been produced over the course of 3,000 years? But instead, because Pharaoh took this grain of wheat with him to the grave, it became nothing but one dead husk. Because it never died, all the potential of that grain. Jesus says in the passage that we've just read, "Very truly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds." Now, clearly he's talking about his own death here. And he's saying that just as a seed planted in the right place at the right time, in the right conditions, is remarkably fruitful, he's saying this is now the right time, the right place, the right conditions for him to die in order to bear a bountiful harvest, to have, the most fruitful ministry possible. It seems to have been the request from some Greeks wanting to meet him that triggered this awareness that his time had come. However, after that request, it seems that Jesus completely ignores the Greeks. We don't know what happens to them after that. But all that follows in the passage is about Greeks, those who are not Jews, Gentile people, coming to faith. If you look just back into the last verse of the previous passage, after Jesus's triumphal entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, the Pharisees say, what are we going to do? We're getting nowhere. Look, the whole world has gone after him. Now, of course, that was predominantly Jews. And now we have these Gentiles asking to see Jesus too. And in verse 32, Jesus, reflecting on this request, says, when I am lifted up, when I'm lifted up on the cross, will draw all men, so not just Jews, but Gentiles as well. I will draw all men to myself. And of course, we know what happened as a result of Jesus's death. The disciples who, had really like laurel than saints, finally have to let go. Hope that Jesus is going to be a king of Israel, omens, and put their country on the map again. Finally transformed by his love, seen most clearly on the cross, his forgiveness of his enemies, his non-retaliation, his forgiveness and care for his disciples, despite their failure to follow him faithfully and to become like mini Jesuses, grain from the same seed as their master. So it's through that transformation that happens as we see Christ dying on the cross for them and see his love, that they are transformed themselves, and through that transformation in their life, take the gospel, the Greeks, and it reaches as far as Britain, and people around the world putting their faith in him. His death was more fruitful than all of his miracles. even raising Lazarus from the dead. And so in this passage, Jesus calls his death his glory and his exaltation, his lifting up. But it wasn't easy for him to do this at all. We can, imagine that because he was divine, he knew what was going to happen. It wasn't troubling for him. But verse 27, he says, now my heart is troubled, and or what shall I say? Save me from this hour. And we know how he wrestled with God in the Garden of Gethsemane over this issue. And we can almost see in verse 25, kind of see Jesus preaching to himself. I've always struggled with this verse, but I think it makes sense when I see it like this, that he's almost saying to himself, the man who loves his life will lose it. He's saying, if I love my life so much that I, avoid the cross, then all that God has called me for is going to be lost. But if I hate my life, and he's using that hyperbole, that exaggeration that the Jews often did, if I deny myself, if I don't love my life more than God's calling and his values, but give myself in his service, then my life will truly be fruitful. There will be abundant, eternal life. And we're called to follow his example. We're called in our lives to have similar experiences to him. Verse 26, Jesus says, whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be, and my Father will honor the one who serves me. Theologians talk about a cruciform, a cross-like pattern to the Christian life, that as Christians, we're frequently called to embrace death and loss in order to experience a fullness, a richness, an abundance of life. What does that mean in practice? We probably won't be asked to physically die for our faith in Jesus, but there will be times when we have to die to ourselves, to our desires, to our hopes, even to some of our beliefs. And I'm going to share with you 3 examples from our experience of lockdown that, I think in a small way illustrates what this means. The first one is, as Jenny has already said, that we don't have a home of our own that we can use in the UK because we gave that up when we went to Nepal. So we're always dependent on relatives, particularly when we come back. The decision to evacuate from Nepal was taken very quickly. So we only had like 3 days to set everything up. So we spoke to Jenny's sister, who we normally stay with when we arrive in Birmingham, to explain what had happened. And they said, but where are you going to stay? You can't stay with us. We're shielding in order to protect Peter's mother. So, you can't stay with us. And we said, well, we'll arrive back. We've got no transport, no house. Where are we going to be? What will we do? Well, here we are 12 months. And, God has provided for us, and he has given us many homes over this last 12 months. It's not always been easy being nomadic, but it has been an incredible blessing to have so much more time with each of our parents than we have had for a long, long time, and to be able to support them in this difficulty. And each place that we lived has had its own beauty and preciousness. That kind of death to our hope for stability, God has brought some blessing to us. The second example is with our daughter. So just after we arrived back, we went for a socially distanced walk with her in the park, and she told us that she had just been diagnosed with cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma. And you can imagine what a blow that was to all of us. She's gone through treatment. You know, the NHS have been wonderful in that. And the signs are good that she has been completely cured. But of course, going through tests and with that air of uncertainty hanging over her. Jenny did a dance course with her. Katie's a dancer, and through Springs, a Christian dance, doing a course which Katie did on lamentation, on grieving over and sadness over things that befall us in our life. And Jenny said it was remarkable the way in which she was able to get people to open up and to share through the medium of dance their experience. And that there was a sense that because of her, because of Katie's experience, there's a kind of deeper and richer ministry developing in her life. An example of going through death and fruitfulness starting to come. The third example is one of a relationship. And over the last few years, someone who is really dear to us and close to us has become less and less responsive to our communications with them. And it's reached the point during lockdown where emails, texts, WhatsApp messages don't receive any response at all. We don't know if we've done something wrong. We don't know if it's to do with this person's with battles with mental health issues, but we just seem to have hit a brick wall. It feels like the relationship is dying. It's painful and unsettling because we have no idea how long it will continue. And the temptation, the deep longing is to try too hard to keep the relationship alive, to try too hard to preserve it, to keep sending messages of love and requests to talk. And it feels like if we do that, we might scare this person off forever and lose it altogether if we try too hard to protect and keep what we have. We'll be like an Egyptian pharaoh clinging to a dead husk. So instead, we kind of have no option but to die to our expectations and hopes of the relationship that we have had, and to plant that grief in the soil, of God's regenerative power, God's spring-like power, and trust that, in his time, a spring will come there and he will bring life out of death. Like for you, I wonder where this life and death struggle has been for you during lockdown. Are the things that you've lost? Are the things that have died or are dying in your life through this time? How tough has it been for you? This passage doesn't minimize pain of loss, but it holds out the hope that that is never the end of the story, that Jesus has gone on this way before us. We may not even be able to imagine what a fruitful future looks like, but death and loss, if we let it take its God-grounded, Jesus-shaped path, it will eventually lead to fruitfulness. It's great that the government has called for a day of reflection on Tuesday as we come to a kind of anniversary of lockdown. We tend to avoid painful experiences in our society, understandably, but it's actually only through facing them and reflection on them that we can grow and move on. And as Christians, give ourselves space for that kind of reflection, weekly, depending on our church tradition, as we move into communion and share bread and wine together, because it places our experiences in the context of sharing in the death and resurrection of Jesus. I loved the song that was chosen before I started to speak. Yet not I, but through Christ in me. That knowledge that Christ and his power of death and resurrection is living in me, in us, is what gives us a hopeful place to embrace the challenges of life. It's, it's at the heart of the gospel that God's transformative power is at work in us. I pray that you will, have the joy of seeing that fruitfulness in your own life individually and as a church. Amen.